Welcome to another Hangout on Air by Federico Ree, entrepreneurship coach and founder of Creative Entrepreneur. Good morning, my name is Federico Ree from Melbourne, Australia, and from Creative Entrepreneur. And in today's Hangout, I have a very, very special guest, which I'll introduce shortly. And today we explore basically what failure is all about and how the Australians go about embracing and adopting and accepting failure as a way of life, and in particular how failure is part of business life and entrepreneurship. So I'd like to have a bit of a chat with Matt Jacobson from Desir about really what his perception and experience and philosophy is to failure and to education per se. So welcome, Matt. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure myself. So today's Hangout is Australia is pioneering new age education focused on dealing with failure. So failure is one of those sort of unconventional subjects that is not often embraced or adopted or encouraged in the world of business. But I know personally myself as a business owner and as an entrepreneur that failure is a must and something you have to experience in order to grow and to learn. So before we get stuck into, the guts of the theme of today, I'd like to just get a bit of a background of yourself, Matt, and understand sort of what you do at Desir and what led you to be the CEO of this amazing organization.
Sure. Thanks very much. So I founded the company, and that was back about 4 years ago now. So in terms of being CEO, I guess when you're the founder, you're kind of it. So it wasn't an existing organization that I decided to join and become the CEO of. It's more a question of what, I guess, led me to think about the concept of Desir in the first place. And in terms of founding the organization, I had a couple of key things that I wanted to do. One was I wanted to create a self-sustainable social enterprise. So we do pretty incredible academic work, which is a business of education, and that fully funds our philanthropic work in Africa. So we don't need to rely on external funding or donations. So that was one driver. But then very, philosophically for me, I always felt a great deal of disconnect between what was happening in traditional education and universities and the real skills that students needed to enter the workforce. So that was a real area that we wanted to tackle, which is how do we create education, higher education that's meaningful and relevant for students and not disconnected to the real world. So that was really the impetus of the vision for Desir.
Fantastic. And you talk about traditional education versus sort of the new age pioneering education of Desir. So what are some fundamental differences between what you deliver and what's conventionally out there in the world of business and entrepreneurship?
Sure. So we do, firstly, lots of different programs from vocational level, full university degrees and postgraduate master's programs. So they operate at different levels. But if I give you one example, I can give you an example at the MBA level. And this applies across everything we're doing, but this gives a good indication of the style of what we're trying to do at Desir. So we have an MBA program, university accredited. So they're all our programs are based on accreditation with large universities. So they're real formal qualifications. So you've got that, serious part in terms of the background, the foundations, the skills and knowledge. But in our MBA, it's completely innovative, unlike anything that's ever been done anywhere in the world. So one example of that is we have no subjects in our MBA. There's no actual subjects. So that's very strange to think of a university program that has no subjects. But the reason that's the case for us is we think that subjects are completely artificial. In a business environment, and as you say, you're an entrepreneur, you have your own business, you would never be given a challenge or a situation and be told, but you're doing this subject at the moment, so just think about this organizational challenge within this box. And don't worry about competitors, don't worry about budgets, just think about it through this one lens. That's not how the world works. So all the things that would ordinarily be taught in an MBA, whether it's strategy, finance, management, organizational behavior, you have to look at all of those areas holistically to solve complex problems. So that's one area where we try to create a much more modern, meaningful, holistic approach. Another area for our MBA is that all of the assessments are based on projects of real current problems or opportunities that major organizations have. So we have partnerships with big global organizations, with not-for-profit organizations, and students form teams and work on those current challenges. So that's another element where you're breaking down those barriers between real world and academia. You're constantly working on the real world challenges. Sure. And then a third component is we have what we call our global leaders faculty. And every academic topic has real world leaders talking about their experience. So we have, we believe, the most sophisticated and incredible global faculty of any institution in the world in terms of real world experience. We have presidents and prime ministers from 5 continents. We have Nobel Prize winners. We have CEOs. We have academics from the top universities in the world, humanitarians. And the point, again, is you can't just do a topic like negotiations and be in a lecture room and learn out of a textbook. You're learning from the founder of USA Networks, one of the most incredible dynamic female entrepreneurs in the US. You're learning from Lindsay Fox, an Australian who started one of the biggest transport companies in Asia-Pac region. You're learning negotiations from the former president of the longest running democracy in Africa. I mean, that one topic, you got an African president, a female American entrepreneur, an Australian entrepreneur, teaching you about their case studies, experience and relevance around that one topic of negotiation. So it's always about bringing those two things together. And we don't believe that traditional education sufficiently engages with industry.
It's fascinating, and certainly it is very innovative what you're doing, and I'm sure that for the students themselves, it's inspiring and engaging, and to have this exclusive opportunity of meeting business leaders and people of the caliber you've mentioned is certainly a way of learning. You've mentioned real problems, and one thing that certainly comes to mind, which is in context with today, is dealing with adversity and dealing with setbacks and even failure. So if we just go to the theory and definition of failure, what is your intake of that, and what is your experience of failure, and why do you believe it is such an important component in the educational space?
Sure. So I'll give you a bit of a view of the world that I have of failure, and that'll kind of cover off a few aspects that you wanted to touch on, the Australian perception of failure and generally how you deal with failure and those sorts of things. So I'll give you a bit of an overview, and then we can sort of tackle or dive into any particular areas that you want to more information on. But Australia, I would say, is quite a negative market for failure. It's not a very tolerant environment for failure. That's the first comment that I would make. You hear a lot of people talking about failure is okay and it's okay to fail. That's great in theory. The reality is that it's a relatively unforgiving market for failure, unlike certain other markets which would be more comfortable, like the US or Israel, which you hear about. But even so, in those situations, I think there's a bit of a simplistic view of failure can be good, and you learn great lessons from failure, and that can help you in future endeavors. I'm pretty sure that no venture capitalist in Israel or Silicon Valley or anyone else would go to a person who's a startup that has failed dismally 3 times and say, wow, great, you've now failed enough, we're going to throw lots of money into your organization. So I think this kind of concept of failure is okay and failure can be a good thing and failure can be supported is a little bit simplistic. I think the real kind of crux for me is I believe that talking about failure focuses on the wrong terminology, because I don't believe that failure is a good thing in any context. I think it's a negative environment to fail, and I don't think it's something that people will generally be supportive of, which goes kind of counter to a lot of what you would hear about, acceptance of failure. What I actually believe is that it's a little bit of just a change in terminology. I think if we were talking about someone who was a scientific researcher doing experimentation, an inventor or whatever, you don't talk about failure. You talk about the scientific method. You talk about experimentation. You talk about adaptability. So if you're running an experiment to invent whatever it may be, and you have to go through a series of modifications and 1,000 different experiments to finally succeed in cracking whatever it is you want to crack, you don't say, well, I failed 999 times and then I finally succeeded on the 1,000th time. It's not the way scientific method works. You didn't fail 999 times. It's just accepted that you try something, didn't quite work out the way you thought. You adapt, you move, you shift, and you constantly do that until you get to a point of clear success, the outcome that you want. And so my first comment is that we should change the language to being adaptable and understanding that you need to experiment and you need to be able to shift to where the markets are moving. If we look at opportunities for startups and entrepreneurship through that lens, I think it's far more acceptable and far more positive. And it's really the way any entrepreneurial organization works. So if you think of great successes, we're sitting here now having a chat on Google Hangout. When the concept for Google came about, there was no concept of Google Hangout, right? So we're actually using a medium and a fantastic service through Google that was never thought of in the original plan. So that's a great example of no startup, in my opinion, sets a 10-year business plan, you know, on day one before they've even commenced. And then 10 years later, they look back and go, yeah, that's exactly what we did. We had our 10-year plan, exactly what we were going to do, and we executed it without any deviation. That is completely fanciful. That's not the way the real world works. So you know, what Facebook created is completely different to their concept initially. So I don't think it's a question of they tried and failed, and then tried and succeeded. I think it's much more about being open to adaptability. And if you're learning from the things that don't quite go so well and you're constantly moving and shifting, then you'll have a successful business and a successful outcome, because you'll never have a successful model on day one that continues on. But if you have a mindset of, you know, working hard and thinking about where the markets shift, then you have the best chance of ultimate success.
Thank you, Matt. That's a great perspective on the word failure, and I like the way you're relabeling and perhaps repackaging the term into more positive, constructive terminology like experimentation, adaptability, and I can add a few more: pioneering, change, innovation, and so forth. So in terms of DeSer and its subjects taught at the curriculum, how do you go about labeling or packaging subjects that really do teach about dealing with failure? How do you go about communicating that to your students?
So I think a great example of this, you know, question of innovation and adaptability, and then there's this whole debate about, you know, whether entrepreneurs, whether you can teach entrepreneurship, whether entrepreneurship is innate or something that can be developed. Again, it links to me very much towards that concept of shifting and adaptability and experimentation. So in the DeSer programs, when we talk about innovation or entrepreneurship, everything that we do is applied. So we have a bachelor degree in entrepreneurship. It's actually called a Bachelor of Applied Entrepreneurship. Applied is a little bit of a kind of buzzword. So for some people, it's just a buzzword and it doesn't really mean very much. For us, it actually means a lot. And it's very fundamental to what we do. So by applied, we mean that you actually have to have applied work in everything that you're doing throughout the degree. So there's no theoretical assignments. You're always working on putting the theory into practice with real businesses. So you're constantly engaging with various businesses throughout your entrepreneurship degree. And at every semester, you've got building blocks where you're building your own enterprise from concept through to when you graduate. You can't just graduate with a piece of paper. You have to graduate with a live enterprise with customers and revenue. And so you're constantly, from the very first semester, you're building essentially your concept and business plan. And then every semester through various things that you're doing, research, focus groups, dealing with investors, etc., you're constantly adapting and revising your business plan every semester to keep modifying it to a point where at the end you have a successful enterprise. So that's really a great example, I think, in terms of the courses and how we deal with this question of entrepreneurship. It's building in the experience. And so I don't think that it's a question of can you teach entrepreneurship or not. I think the problem generally has been that entrepreneurship has been taught in a vacuum, or what other people might call a lecture room, often from academics who have never even run real businesses. That to me is an artificial environment and not something that is going to lead to entrepreneurial success. if you have instead an environment of real experience where you're constantly dealing and interacting with the real world, testing, modifying, then of course you can get incredible experience and build the skills necessary for an entrepreneur.
Fantastic. Look, I know myself as an entrepreneur that the people that I coach come to me with great enthusiasm and desire to be that next serial entrepreneur or that successful person in their own right. But I do discover later on that a lot of these people sort of give up along the way because it's just too hard for them. So is your curriculum, your course open to any aspiring entrepreneur, and what challenges do they face in getting all the way through to the end, especially when you're dealing with real case studies and real examples rather than just being in the lecture room?
Sure, that's a really good question, and I think it's a really important consideration for any person that wants to be an entrepreneur. So one of the things really that that we believe very strongly is that entrepreneurial is a little bit kind of cool and fashionable at the moment, absolutely, and a lot of people talking about entrepreneurship. The reality is that entrepreneurship is really hard work. It's really hard dedication and work 7 days a week, not even a 5-day-a-week job. So yes, it might seem exciting to be an entrepreneur, and people might see the successful side or the kind of cool side of the events and the products that are being developed and being very innovative. But if you ask any successful entrepreneur, about their workload, they'll tell you that it's an incredibly challenging and hard-working environment. So the first thing is, are you up for that challenge? The biggest reason that I see failure, I've heard this, since I've started working. I mean, I really started working in grade 1 in school, my first business, but, as I keep progressing through my career and certainly in my professional career, I've heard so many people say to me, I've got this great idea, got this business that I've started. Oh, fantastic. So you're doing that full time? No. I've got my day job that's kind of paying my bills, but I'm kind of doing this in my spare time. And I just kind of, to myself, not to them, kind of rolling my eyes, thinking that's absolutely ridiculous. You have no idea what setting up a business really means. It's not a part-time hobby exercise. You're either serious about it or you're not. So the first thing is that are you really serious about the hard work side, not the cool side? There's a lot of stresses, managing staff, managing finance. These are real business challenges that entrepreneurs deal with on a day-to-day basis. The other side is that, entrepreneurship isn't necessarily for everyone. And I think there's a real shame that there isn't as much emphasis on intrapreneurship, because at the other extreme, you have corporations, you have government departments even, you have not-for-profits at any level of organization. You have this challenge of being innovative, being more creative, being concerned about disruptors. And I think that there's an amazing opportunity for more intrapreneurs, for people with that entrepreneurial spirit, but to work within a bank or within a transport company with a focus on how can we shake up the system, how can we be the ones that are innovative, instead of thinking, well, I've worked for a bank and I want to be more creative, so I've got to basically resign, move out and start my .com. And it doesn't necessarily need to be one extreme or the other.
So in relation to entrepreneurship, does your curriculum cater for entrepreneurs or people who want to remain within an organization, but obviously open up that opportunity to be entrepreneurial?
Absolutely. So for us, we see this, broad space of entrepreneurship, innovation and creativity in 3 different areas. And we don't try to ever push anyone into, one of those areas. But one is around social entrepreneurship or social enterprise. So not necessarily about, making a lot of money or being driven by profits, but being innovative and creative in the way you tackle real global and social issues. Obviously, the more traditional sense of entrepreneurship in terms of I want to set up a business, and that's a commercial enterprise. And obviously that's a big focus for us and something that we're very passionate about. And equally, as you say, yes, intrapreneurship. And so intrapreneurship could be really very similar themes to entrepreneurship, but within an organization, because a lot of the themes are very similar. What is the concept? What is the plan? How are you getting stakeholder engagement? How are you getting investor support? Now, investor could be a VC, but it could be getting the financial support from a major telecommunications company. Still similar principles of how you're getting the funding and how you're setting up an enterprise, essentially, or a division of an enterprise. Yeah, so just in terms of the corporate space, I was saying that there's a lot of great innovation and creativity in that space as well, in terms of how you get stakeholder engagement, how it's funded, whether it really is just an internal division of a much bigger corporation, or whether it's spun out as a separate entity with its own more autonomous decision-making processes. These are all really interesting challenges that organizations have that innovative and creative people can deal with in the more traditional corporate sector as well. So we would love to see more innovation and creativity happening from within, not just, you know, that sort of traditional concept of the entrepreneur in their garage starting out, you know, with no money and then slowly building it into something remarkable.
What a great perspective, Matt. And the use of the word entrepreneur, certainly in the Australian marketplace, is very uncommon. I know that from personal experience. Just before we go any further, just for the viewers, I'm talking to Matt Jacobson. He's the CEO and founder of Douceur, and a company providing quality education in the space of entrepreneurship. In today's hangout, we are exploring how Australia is pretty much gearing up to, you know, people dealing with failure and how it's actually adopted and embraced and accepted in the world of education and entrepreneurship per se. So I'd like to sort of bring the focus back into the subject of failure. And a question I have for you, Matt, is there a point where you can fail too much, or is a high failure rate almost guaranteeing you a high success rate in the long term?
Yeah. So failure, to me, we had this conversation a little bit earlier, and, you know, I focus more on adaptability. So I guess it's just what your definition is. So to me, failure is absolute. You know, you started a business and it basically gets shut down because it just completely, you know, had no customers, or the financial model just absolutely didn't work, and you literally wind up that enterprise and it goes away. And so that is complete failure. But I think what's much more common is, as I say, this concept of adaptability. And so there's no limit to adaptability. You never finish adapting. You know, what's Facebook or Google worth now? Enormous amounts of money. Facebook potentially, I don't know, $100 billion, Google even more. Are they done? Are they finished? Adaptability is over? Or are they constantly thinking about what are the, you know, new challenges and the new opportunities that are coming up in the future? So you're always adapting and shifting. And if you don't do that very, very regularly, you're never going to remain an entrepreneurial, innovative organization. So if your definition of failure is that you try something, doesn't quite work, then you should be doing that just consistently, daily, weekly, monthly, constantly doing that. If it's really a question of adaptability over, you know, failure, I don't think that really you want to be shutting down businesses completely because they totally failed in every respect. I don't believe that's a good thing.
Sure. In terms of industry trends, do you, from your experience or knowledge, are there industries or businesses per se that are embracing or acknowledging or accepting or encouraging a high failure rate in order to innovate?
Well, obviously you've got your entrepreneurial organizations. I use Uber. Uber clearly is a disruptor. And when you use it regularly, you realize that even little changes to the apps and the way they work are constantly coming out. So it's not that they had a great idea and they're just now kicking back and thinking we're just going to rely on that idea. They're constantly innovating. So you've got your very disruptive, innovative type of organizations, and that's their culture. Their culture is to constantly be pushing the envelope. Then you've got your larger, more established organizations in insurance, finance, banking, transport, government, whatever it may be. And I think there's a real disconnect there. I think there's a lot of talk. You can't go to a conference without hearing, you know, a CEO or a director saying how important innovation and creativity is. And a lot of the times, unfortunately, it is complete lip service. One of the biggest telecommunications companies in the world, I heard the CEO speaking at a function talking about exactly this. You know, we've got to create, we've got to innovate or die, you know, all the stuff that you would expect someone to say. And then I'm kind of laughing to myself because I know a situation in that telecommunications company where a group tried to start up this new concept that they thought would be really relevant for the actual organization, not for themselves. And because they were, you know, trying something different and coming up with some new innovation, they got hammered by the legal department, the HR department. This wasn't authorized. This hasn't been approved. You know, copying every single email that had gone through, you know, this thick from the HR department that had been reviewed, told them to stop this unauthorized project. I mean, you couldn't get more of a shutdown of this innovative spin-off that was trying to get a bit of legs to see if it had, you know, any option for this company. Yet the CEO's out there in public saying, wow, we've got to be innovative and creative. So I think there is really a big disconnect between, you know, the lip service and the fact that organizations really do need to be more innovative, or they're going to continue to be disrupted by, you know, the likes of an Airbnb or you know, any other organization. You know, financial services, I think, is a really big area that's going to be disrupted over the next decade. Anywhere where you've got large profits and very traditional practices is essentially a recipe for problems for your incumbent providers.
Fantastic insight. You talk about Uber and Airbnb and other disruptive organizations. Do you feel that technology is an aggravator or a facilitator with regards to failure and pioneering and innovating and growing as a result in the business?
So I think, you know, technology, generally speaking, is an enabler. So I think that absolutely technology is what drives most of the change and the innovation, but the technology is only the enabler. So typically speaking, the technology is available for various organizations, and it's who's going to think about using it in a creative way. So we've mentioned Uber and Airbnb. So Airbnb, you know, from a technological point of view, is not really very remarkable. You're using the internet. What's remarkable is connecting people in a way that hadn't been connected before. The technology that's driving Uber is essentially your iPhone. And, you know, creating an app that isn't really that remarkable. What's remarkable is, again, creating an interaction and a service connecting drivers and individuals through a very seamless and simple to use application, but nothing technologically remarkable. But, you know, for example, taxis just never thought that they needed to worry about that because they were an incumbent provider, really had a monopoly on the market. So why change? And history repeats itself, whether it's the newspaper industry, whether it's Encyclopedia Britannica, or whether right now it's universities, which is a huge area of disruption in the space that we're in. When you're at that sort of just emerging disruption stage, those incumbents who have brands, who have almost monopoly positions, just consistently think throughout history that we know what we're doing. We've been doing this for decades. Our brand is so strong that no, you know, realestate.com site or Seek Learning is going to disrupt a newspaper that's been around for 100 years and making a heck of a lot of money. And it's amazing that that situation, if you look at the disruptors of today and the incumbents, they're saying the exact same thing that Encyclopedia Britannica said 30 years ago. I mean, you could just replace the company names and you'd have the same language. It's quite remarkable. So, you know, people are not necessarily learning from the history of how, you know, disruption can very significantly affect large organizations.
Certainly some great words of wisdom there, Matt. And just to wrap up our session today, if we think about the word technology, disruption, you know, high failure rate and innovation, what advice do you give the viewers, especially the young generation, the millennials perhaps, with regards to wanting to be entrepreneurial and you know, preparing themselves for that bumpy road ahead?
Sure. So I think that, you know, global experience is one of the most important things. So I know you asked a question about technology and, you know, the importance of technology and innovation, and absolutely it's important. You know, STEM is unfortunately not prioritized sufficiently enough, and having, you know, more math, sciences, technology, understanding of coding, If kids were doing more entrepreneurial stuff in schools, I think that would be absolutely amazing. So I think bringing in that technology, app development from early stages. Schools are designed to have very rigid systems, follow the rules, here are your subjects, you have exams at the end. And then at the end, we value this thing called innovation, but it's never been part, in fact, we've been as non-innovative as possible in a school environment, and then saying to kids when they're adults, oh, you should actually be innovative and creative. So there's a disconnect there. So focusing more on the technology and the entrepreneurial and the innovation spirit right from primary school, I think is a really big focus. We're very privileged to have amazing people that work with us at Desur. I mentioned, CEOs of the biggest companies and presidents, etc. And, the global chairman of KPMG said this better than anyone else. You think about an accounting firm, very conservative style organization, one of the biggest in the world, that would have very traditional practices and the way they would do business. And the global chairman of KPMG said, the last thing we want is someone who's just done an accounting degree at a recognized university, a couple of internships, and says, I'm ready to get a job. They're not offering anything unique. And for someone like that to say, you know what we would really value? Someone that said, I worked for an oil company in Nigeria, or I was working for a finance company in Turkey for a year. Absolutely. And then coming to KPMG and having a different perspective on the world. So yes, technology, and the more familiar we are with technology and the workings of technology, I think that's the grounding, that's the concrete foundation for a future in entrepreneurship. But it's not enough. I think that being out there in the world and thinking about diversity and different cultures and getting that very varied experience, that's what drives innovation as well. That's what drives entrepreneurship. It's connecting dots that hadn't otherwise been connected before.
Awesome stuff, Matt. Thank you so much for your time and for you to demystify the term failure and actually putting a positive spin on such a term. Your words of wisdom, I'm sure, will be of great value and interest to a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs out there. And I wish you all the best at Desur, and hope to stay connected, and we'll finish up the session shortly. So thanks again, Matt.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Frederico. I really enjoyed it, and absolutely pleasure to be interviewed with you. So thank you so much.
It's a privilege, and thanks again. For more of Federico's Hangouts on Air, please visit www.creativeentrepreneur.com.au.